the gate.
Yeah.
All right, remember that? So what was going on in that scene? What happened? So they're all in the trash compactor, right? And the walls start coming in, right? They're
Snake.
So what happened? What's the first thing they try to do when the walls start caving in? What breaks the walls up? Breaks the walls open? Right. Yeah. Right.
Oh,
I think,
that was later.
What was that later?
Not
What
the
was
first thing.
Oh, they were trying to.
Looking for.
So they all try
Use
to.
force.
The first thing they do, what do they do? They crowd into the center, right? They all crowd into the center
Yeah.
to avoid the incoming walls.
And then they
right?
start
So then after that,
themselves.
start pushing themselves up against walls, and then they
They're
grab a big bar. They think that this massive bar is gonna stop the walls that are designed to crush that bar. You know, like literally, right? So what finally worked? Like what finally shut off the trash compactor? Right. And what did R2D2 do?
Shut down the system.
Yeah.
He shut down the system, right? Okay, so think about that metaphor in terms of where we're at, like globally right now, and in the U.S. Is you can think of two of these walls as two massive crises that are caving in on us from both sides. One of them being total environmental catastrophe, mainly affecting working class communities of color, places like Richmond that are being systematically polluted by Chevron refinery, causing huge rates of cancer and asthma. And that example, look all over the world for things like that. On the other hand, massive economic, crisis, financial ruin, economic collapse, bailouts, recessions and depressions all over the world. So think about these two walls coming in on us from both sides. So what's the first thing that people in the country have done? So think about this class of people. Think about what they did. They moved to the center, right? So what they do, what happens when you move into the center is you push everyone out to the sidelines, right? So the ruling class in this country, we have these big crises coming up. They move to the center, push everyone out to the side to deal with the walls. And what happens when you're surrounded by a bunch of people? You can't see the walls, right? You think everything's fine, right? So these walls are coming in. They think everything's fine. Don't have to do anything, right? What's the second thing we do? We put the big steel bar up. Doesn't do shit, right? So that can symbolize false. I don't know what we call it. Kind of false hope, false reforms, right? So if we're talking about economic crisis, thinking bailing out the banks, or modest reforms like that aren't actually changing the conditions that led to these collapses, are like these false reforms. So what we need to do now, and this is what we're gonna maybe move into a little bit, talking about social movements, is doing what R2D2 did and shutting down the system, because it is absolutely, if we do not shut it down, we're going to eventually see ourselves in the very near future with total environmental collapse and total further economic collapse, increased poverty. Just in the last couple decades alone, the world poverty rate has grown by about 100 million people have fallen into poverty over the last few decades, and that's going to continue to increase if we don't start to change something drastically right now and start to shut down the very gears of the system that has led to this shit. And it is, like we said earlier, was built on the backs of hundreds of millions of people over history. So that's why one term we might use a lot and gets kind of misinterpreted also is the word radical. And what radical means versus liberal, or radical versus reform. The reason we say that is because radical, that comes from the Latin radix, which means root. We think of radicals as people that go at the root of the problem. So it doesn't matter if we're talking about education, we have to go at the root of the problem and really look at, okay, well, who made the decision? How is the system set up? Where do we fit in? Why didn't we get a say in this? Whose interests are at stake? Whose interests are being represented, in the halls of power? Whose interests are being represented in the media? So going to the root of the problem. So that's why we use the word radical versus reform, reformist, who, a lot of times you use reforms to get to radical change, but that's a whole other story. Armed revolution for the most part. Most of that had to do with people just not cooperating anymore and saying, we're not going to do it anymore. We don't want to fight this war. We don't know why we're fighting. It was World War I. We don't know why we're fighting this war. We're poor people. We're starving. We have no interest in maintaining this monarchy. So we're just not going to do it anymore. We're going to stop fighting. We're going to stop producing to create. We're going to stop, producing to create wealth for the ruling class, and we're going to take it over. And in the process, what they did is they created Soviets, which means Workers' Council in Russian. So that was a place where workers came together and democratically decided, how to produce things, what they were going to produce, and how to provide for everybody. And it was enormously successful for a long period of time. It went astray, as some might know, with people like Stalin and others, killing millions of people, water under the bridge. But initially the idea of it in the initial years of the Russian Revolution were incredibly incredibly inspiring to millions of people all over the world and led to countless other revolutions, successful, some unsuccessful, working people all over the country coming together, all over the world coming together. So the way to do this exercise is, the first thing we want to do is put something in this circle that is like one of our core values. It doesn't have to be something that encompasses absolutely everything, but what's like a core fundamental value that we believe in, that we can agree on.
Interdependence, interconnectedness, interdependence.
Community. All right. My hands are about frozen. So as a core value, that's a broader picture. We want to build community. What are some concrete ways, very specific ways that we can do that in the near future?
Time banking.
Time banking?
Time banking is basically it's really just a website that organizes work that people do for each other. So if I work for you for an hour, you get 1 hour of credit in your time bank account, and then you can use that 1 hour to get services from someone else who's in the bank, and it just has amazing ramifications. It's just this incredibly simple thing that just, boom, provides community.
Concrete, like things people want to see?
Education.
Yeah, education.